The presentation that I'm about to do, I have to do everything contextual in nature. That if you look at, let's go Dirty Dancing on this hypnotic profession, nobody puts hypnotic techniques in the corner. This is a presentation on what I do with public speakers, but let's just rewind out. This is what I do with athletes. This is what I do with practically everything else. But let's get laser specific for a few moments and talk specifically about working with public speakers, because it's where the first kind of frame I want to put on everything that we're about to get into. Let's talk business for a few quick moments here, because why not? This image right here very clearly is an old-timey wagon wheel. I will be signing autographs for personal sketches after this presentation. Hold for applause. Never mind. Old-timey wagon wheel. And the premise of that is, inside of your business, define the hub of your communication. What's the way that you want to be interacting with people the most? In the shape of my local business, Virginia Hypnosis, it's the Virginia Hypnosis website, which in 2019, a website is a mechanism to show people videos. That's what it's all about. The other image I want to put alongside of this very clearly is a dog whistle. Never mind the applause, but a dog whistle for the reason that, assuming you have a dog, assuming you've trained it to respond to the sound of blowing the dog whistle, you go to the dog park, you don't want every dog to come running. You just want your dog, and that's why you train that behavior. I put those up there because it's where, as we begin as hypnotists, you have every right to run things the way that you want to run it. You know, in terms of, I want to work on anything and everything that's going to come into my office. Though the more refined you get in your journey as the practitioner, the more you start to realize that not just in terms of specialties, but let's call it out, here are the things that you are absolutely excited to work with and you look forward to going to your office to work on. So nowadays in my office, I used to see upwards of like 30, 40 people a week, and now I don't do that anymore. And now I max out the calendar at about 15 people a week as the maximum. Still inside of that, I pull some of those hours out to do other things. And most of what I'm doing now are working with people for stop smoking, because that's fun, and as well working with high performance like entrepreneurs, business people, public speaking, which I love that category for a noble reason and a kind of noble reason. One being, these are people who get stuff done. These are people who look at something and take full responsibility for what they've got to create to happen. It's an entirely different dynamic. When you've got this self-made person in front of you, and here's the character type, here's everything in my world that's going so well right now. It's just that one thing, which we get to kick off that process by saying, look, this isn't about what's wrong with you. This is about what's great with you. How do we harness that? How do we put that into use? From that perspective, which, by the way, I say that to everybody, but for that perspective, every session now goes from good to great. We're harnessing what's great about that and putting them into use. That's the noble reason. The still kind of noble reason is these are people who are used to spending money on themselves, because we got bills to pay, right? So looking at the things that you do, even if this working with public speakers category is not your specific interest, which also look inside of that, you all probably know the word that's spelled this way. If you've heard me say this before, stay out for a few moments. How is that word pronounced? Niche. Thank you. It's not niche, because niche rhymes with rich. Even better, let's go a little bit deeper into this in terms of micro niche. So notice I didn't say anybody and everybody public speaking. My targeting is specifically towards working with high-performance entrepreneurs and business owners who want to improve their public speaking. Which, by the way, not necessarily just to be the plug, but as I wrote Work Smart Business and it came out earlier this year, there are a lot of stories in the book of me talking to people who have issues with public speaking, which by the media reference, what does that do? This is the guy who does that. And now we can talk sales funnels for a moment. I'm positioned at the end of the funnel, and now it's already the buy-in. If you work your business in the right way, it's no longer the dialogue on the phone of, oh, I need this to work. It's instead, I've been tired of this issue for years, I'm ready for Thursday, let's get rid of this problem, which is a much better dynamic to kick off your process. So much of what we're about to get into, let's build a contextual mindset of all personal change. It doesn't matter what the issue is, all personal change can be broken down to 4 simple questions. How do you feel now? How would you rather be feeling? What are those things you're doing now? What are those things you'd rather be doing? Everything can be fit into that construct. And again, nobody puts hypnotic techniques in the corner to look at any single method and go, well, how can I use that inside of that framework? How can I use that, though? Then again, inside of specific categories, there are tips and tricks, and that's what this presentation is about. Because the entire process, something I have not been saying in public presentations until this year, is as soon as I allowed myself to buy into the premise that the hypnotic experience is one part hypnosis session, because yay, we're at a hypnosis convention, but another part, let's call it mutually beneficial psychological influence. That's where the entire thing began to become a whole lot more flexible. That again, it's not just we know this and we say this as practitioners. I don't believe enough of us are actually living this out in our offices. The entire experience is hypnotic suggestion. Even down to the questions that I ask, which I'll give you some of those questions, even down to the stories that I'll tell these people, even in terms of getting into some of the nuances. And my whole mindset, the reason why for many issues I am a multiple session practitioner is, again, I'm amused by negative language used in a positive, healthy way, is that I've got no interest in your problem. Because this is not a process about working on your problem. This is about transitioning you into your outcome. So there's a very specific outcome-based question I'll share with you as part of this that immediately establishes the presupposition you're going to get over that fear, but now we're moving into peak performance. Now we're moving to actually improving the skill, which, by the way, as is my style, you are all furiously writing down notes because I like to do a 3-hour presentation in 48 minutes. I am filming this, and this might become a podcast depending on video quality. I say that for an audio podcast. That's a stupid sentence. But I'll make this video available to you, and I'll pay the money to have my other people go off and transcribe every bit of this. So if you've seen me at the table, I have my purple iPad of justice, my glorified clipboard. If you've already done it at this event, everybody's getting the same stuff. If you're already on my list for other things, do this again anyway, because this tags you specifically for being here. Because if you see the stuff I'm doing on Facebook right now, but join us next year at this event, let's get those people here. So I'll pass that around so you can relax those hands and leave your hypnosis conference without carpal tunnel. Some of the questions that I'll ask to kind of pre-frame, to build the scenario of what we're about to get into, which, by the way, this is also going to be a workshop on anchoring. This is also going to be a workshop on doing an actual group demonstration, so you can use this stuff for yourself. I have fancy neon green handouts, which I save for later because I don't want you seeing the technique until we've done it. And for those of you who are familiar with Mad Libs, we're going to spend a good 75 seconds talking about Mad Libs. Yay, cliffhangers. So some of the pre-frame questions. The person reaches out to me, and the first question I'll ask is, what's the situation in which you need to improve that public speaking? You know, just simply getting some of the nuts and the bolts of the details, because just as a preview, it's going to be different from one presentational style to the other. You know, it's where I'll ask the question sometimes, just so I know the desired outcome. You know, level with me. How dynamic does your presentation have to be? Which, think about why I asked that. I'm in Springfield, Virginia. I'm in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And it's a different presentation style when it's the guy at the Pentagon standing behind the lectern, clutching it with all of his might so you can't see his hands shaking, and talking about what's on a PowerPoint display behind him. That's a different presentation with, there are many people who fit into this description, and this guy gave me permission to say it in this generalized way. He's a guy who, he goes, I'm a political lobbyist. I'm one of the good ones, which is rare to find in DC. I'm one of the good ones. I aged out of the foster care system. And I now do advocacy and fundraising for foster care programs. And I have to step onto a platform and speak to privileged millionaires who grew up with both parents and get them to fund our program. Can you see that's going to be a different dynamic than, you know, clutching with all his might, hiding behind the lectern so you don't see the legs shaking. One is this, I have a guy one time who I made a mistake with, but he laughed at it with me, so we kind of didn't offend him, because he goes, I work in groundwater contamination, and I've been invited to do the closing keynote at our annual groundwater contamination convention, to which I go, that sounds like an exciting group of people. He goes, yeah. And he invented this technology, which they've now patented, and it's now being licensed to all the other companies around the world who do this. And he goes, basically, in terms of groundwater contamination, I came up with a system that makes it so we've shortened the paperwork time frame. That basically it's one of the same 15 to 18 core issues or something else, So we've created a document at the beginning of our tracking to expedite the record keeping, to which I slip and go, "You invented a checklist?" He goes, "Yeah, basically." I'm like, "That's it?" He goes, "I know, right?" I'm like, "No one else thought of it?" He goes, "I know, and we patented it. Can you believe that?" It's like, which again, how dynamic does the presentation need to be? Not much. So it's where, you've heard horror stories of the, let's pull in unfair stereotypes, the male hypnotist saying to the 65-year-old grandmother, "Imagine there you are on the beach looking sexy in the bikini as you've lost the weight." That might not be her goal. So don't be the asshole who says that. So the same as, here I am working with this government contractor, and I'm trying to get them to channel like the most dynamic speakers in the world. That's not the desired outcome. So it's not to say one is right or wrong. It's a matter of what's appropriate for the situation that they're going to be inside of. What's the next step? I always want to move people after the problem. I want to be throwing that hypnotic lawn dart, patent pending, I want to be throwing that hypnotic lawn dart after their issue, which is building the presupposition that now the issue is already resolved, which this is a story I'll tell my clients oftentimes over the phone, just so I know what the outcome of this ought to be. Here's a guy who came into the office, a guy named Tom, wanted to improve his public speaking for a very straightforward reason. He goes, "There's a lot of open leadership roles at my company. And as I'm kind of hiding in the meetings and not putting myself out there, I'm not that visible. So by improving my public speaking, one, I won't feel nervous and anxious all day, and two, I want to get one of those jobs." Which, fast forward the story, he calls me up like 3 years later, and the first thing is, "Jason, I've got a brand new problem. Because I got rid of this first problem, I'm now in a vice president role in this division of my company. And just so you know, this new problem is one that it's worth an extra $60,000 a year to me, so thank you. I work with a team of people who don't get along. And the problem is I'm sometimes taking the stress of that home. I wouldn't have this problem if I didn't get rid of that problem, so I'm not complaining, but just, help me deal with this thing a little bit better." So the greatest problems in life are the ones we invent ourselves, is the lesson of that story. So what is illustrated by telling that story? Hey, this stuff works. Without having to say, "Hey, I'm good at this. Trust me, come on." No. Instead, show is better than tell. Give that demonstration of that desired result. The next nuance of this, and I'll give you a few of the tips and tricks inside of this toward the end of this, which is that if, the positioning that I got because of the book, the positioning I got because of the podcast, the speaking I do around the world, filling in that gap of using the hypnotic languaging for greater influence, greater positive persuasion as I put it together. So it's where if I'm able to deliver the phrase that this process is on one part of things, I love the phrase, it's a hybrid approach, because that can mean something different for whoever I'm talking to. It's a bit of a hybrid approach where on one side of things, we're going to be resolving that fear. On the other side of things, would you find a greater level of confidence if you had a few, let's call them influential secret weapons, to deliver your message with greater influence? Would that be helpful to you? Don't you think you would, and listen for the embedded commands, don't you think you would naturally feel more confident now as you're speaking and now are putting greater influence and greater impact in your words? Would that be helpful as well? So it's where on one side of things we're going to be addressing the actual presentation, the actual emotional undercurrent of that issue. On the other side of things, let's punch it up. Let's take some of that messaging, and I'll share some of the nuances of how we do that over time. I want to build a few other foundational points before we get into the concepts here, because this is our good friend, the bell curve. And any emotional state, we're about to talk about anchoring. For any emotional state, whether it's happiness, frustration, hunger, boredom, whatever emotional state it might be, there's a place where it starts at 0, and then it slowly ramps up 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way up to 100%, and then from there it goes right back down to baseline to 0, which 0 is not necessarily a negative, it just means it's not there anymore. This is common language in terms of anchoring. I want to give you a bit of a strategy that you're going to hear in the group demonstration we're going to do here in a bit, where the question would often be, if I want to, which let's get jargon out of the way, you'll hear anchoring, you'll hear triggering, you'll hear building resource states. We're all using the same language, so Choose your favorite method. But the question is, if I'm observing this emotional state, let's go with confidence. If I'm directing my client into an emotional state and I want to build the ability to create the anchor and then trigger it later, just someone call it out. If I'm building the scape of drawing up the feeling and then letting it ramp back down, at what point in that journey do you think I'd want to do my best to establish, to build that anchor? And some people were pointing at the very top, and like those people, I was also wrong. Because the answer is just before the peak. Because get ready for the giant air quotations. In theory, if I do it at the peak, I might be missing it. And again, in theory, I might be catching it on the downward moving slope, thereby building the anchor on the feeling falling down. Which, how the heck do you do that? As you're directing the client into that amazing emotional state, opening up that full sensory acuity, opening up that full calibration, and observing that moment and trying to guess exactly where it is and time it just right. Which, those of you who have been seeing clients for quite some time, that doesn't sound as complicated as it does to those who this is a newer concept to. How do you track it? How do you build that? So you can open up that full calibration, you can open up that full sensory acuity and just get really good at guessing at it, or you can just cheat appropriately. Which I hate the nuance of people taking various techniques that are already out there and slapping a fancy name on it and calling it their own. So with that being said, let me now introduce you to the anchoring sandwich. Yeah. Sandwich between two suggestions of increasing the emotional state. The creamy white center of that hypnotic confidence Oreo is the suggestion to establish the anchor. Sandwich between two moments of building the emotional state, in the middle is where I say, do the thing. So let's assume it's the simple example of squeeze the hand into a fist. This sounds technical, it's actually quite simple. As you let that feeling of confidence begin to rise up throughout you, take that hand, squeeze into a fist, turn up that confidence even greater, even stronger. You heard the sequence there. Turn up this feeling, do that thing, turn up that feeling even more. So by doing that, we are just naturally driving to either discover or create that moment in a much more organic sense, while at the same time opening up that calibration, observing what the person is going through. And this is where we as the practitioner are learning how to really see when the person is truly shifting into that. Focus on that feeling rising. As you do that thing, turn that thing up even more. I'm the guy who also talks about business in terms of hypnosis, and if you've heard me do that before, really it's the same lecture. Because whether we're moving someone from curious shopper to satisfied buyer, whether we're moving someone from I'm terrified of public speaking to now I'm getting better at this and I'm really excelling at this, it's a similar journey. So recognize that even in your office, even when it's already a paying client, and in my business systems, they've already prepaid online and then they show up. There's some ways that I book things now that I'm doing that phone consultation when they've already paid in full and signed up. It's so much more fun to do that process without having to sell something because the online stuff has sold it for me. So it's where I am selling the technique. I am ethically and just bouncing that conversational change strategy off of you before we do it. So this is where I will give my clients a bit of a menu. So let's get specific to the public speaking here. There's a concept that's out there called anchoring. And this might sound like something brand new to you, but I'll tell you it's something you're already doing. And in my hypnosis world, we often live by the phrase that the same way into the problem is the same way out of the problem. Because up until now, whenever you found yourself in front of that group of people speaking in public, hypnotically you connected yourself to feeling this sensation of fear when you saw that audience, right? So part of what we're going to do today is retrain that anchor, which again, this is something you've done on your own your entire life. You hear a song on the radio. It reminds you of things you were going through when you heard that song. You walk into a room and you smell lemons. And it reminds you of this cleaning product. It reminds you of that dessert. We are constantly getting anchored. It's the law of associative memory. So as part of what we're going to do today is we're going to build a thing that's called a resource anchor. And it's going to be a thing that you can do anytime, anywhere, and nobody is going to know you're doing something, which, back to the hypnosis audience, sorry. Rather than the game of giving you a 45-minute audio program and telling you you're going to have to listen to this every single day for the rest of your life, otherwise this isn't going to work, we're going to build the ability that in any moment, even if you feel the slightest trace of that old, useless, unnecessary feeling, here's a quick thing you can do without anyone realizing you're doing something and immediately go back into that confidence. Sound good? And they always go, yes. What have I just now described? The exact process we're about to do. Describing the technique is doing the technique. Business. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. And by engaging with you conversationally before the process begins, you are ratifying, yes, that's going to work for me. Which then by the time I deliver it in the process, it's familiar, they're meeting up to that expectation. Now we're in sync and we've taken our techniques from good to great. But here's the menu. Now, you know the situation in which you're going to be speaking, right? So you tell me, I'll give you some options here, because some people that I work with, it's as simple as a gesture like taking your finger and thumb and squeezing them together. For some people, it's like squeezing both fists and releasing. If you watch any of my videos, you've seen this gesture, which usually I start the camera shot after I've done that, because then it's not weird. If you're familiar, back in the day, the actors Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, true story. Jack Lemmon, the director would yell action, and Jack Lemmon would go, magic time, and then begin the scene, which part of why he did that was it drove Walter Matthau crazy. Which made him love it even more. There's a made-for-TV movie a few years ago of Tuesdays with Morrie. And Hank Azaria, the guy who's Apu from The Simpsons, was in that TV movie with him. And he goes, it was the biggest acting challenge of my life. Because here I am with this legend. And I'm having to do this like dramatic deathbed scene with this guy who's just incredible. And the director matching the tone of the scene. Action, Jack Lemmon, magic time. So we're familiar with anchors. So for some people, it's a squeeze of the fingers. For some people, it's a squeeze of both fists. For some, it's a clap. I get a lot of my public speakers, the same as I work with athletes, it's something organically in their posture, such as that moment of feet on the ground and the shoulders back, the chest out, and now they're welcoming the audience in and they're bringing everybody into their message. Which, has anyone here seen The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel? Which that moment is constantly in that show. They're experts in anchoring. They call it tits up. So, and I'll say that to the client. I go, you know your situation, what's best for you? Which, thank you, credit back to the late, great Michael Elner, who would work with someone for hypnotic pain relief and go, today we can do this or today we can do that. You know your situation, which is going to be better for you. And by asking that question, you are getting a hypnotic contract, which that now becomes part of my process. So we're going to build that organic anchor based upon basically drawing out some moment of confidence from their past. What if they say they've never felt confident? I got it thinking for that. Wait for it. And we're going to establish that, connect that feeling, condition it, loop it, compound it, emerge, test, you're on your way. This is one part of the entire system of what I'll do. But again, things you can do anytime, anywhere, and nobody knows you're doing something. It's kind of like my little phrases that I'll use, which they can do this, they can do that. They can go Mrs. Maisel on the audience. Whatever they want it to be, they can shift into that. So that's kind of the opening stages of everything we're about to do. One final bit is to point out the character flaw that I fall asleep throughout most science fiction. Only because my kids came home from school and because they see other kids talking about it, they now know what Star Wars is. And it wasn't until last year I finally watched Star Wars without falling asleep. I don't get too deep into like science fiction where I have to learn a new world. But I can probably quote practically every line of Spaceballs. Enough said. So depending on your preference of movies, Luke was trying to learn the Force to discover that he always had it in him, right? Basic hero's journey. Dorothy wanted to go home, but she was always with her friends, therefore she was always home. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Or, let's go there. Lone Star was trying to learn the Schwartz, but the ring came from a Cracker Jack box. He was born with it. You and I have just become best friends. And a student of mine actually heard me give this lecture years ago and somehow found the balloons from the world premiere of Spaceballs. They say Spaceballs the premiere, Spaceballs the balloon, with a little note that says, this is 35-year-old latex, do not blow these up. And they're worth as much as the Priority Mail envelope they're inside of. So what am I getting at here? I call this, just to have a name for my reference, the Schwartz principle, because why not? That as soon as we establish the need for the anchor, I'm going to pull the rug out from the anchor so that now you can turn on that feeling by choice. So it's not the game of, oh no, wait, I have to do this thing. Oh no, wait, I have to do this thing. Oh, I have to do this. I have, whatever it is. I just want to establish that ability that the anchor is like the clipboard of a computer. That's the place where we just kind of temporarily copy and paste information, so then I can paste it somewhere else later on and erase the need for the anchor. However, build the premise that the more you make use of this, the better it's going to work for you. And the better it works for you, the less you're going to need it, because you just know how to turn on that confidence at will. So this is all some of the opening frames. I wanted to give you the seeds, because as we actually do this as a group experience together, which I'll give you the handout that gives you everything for it, and since you're doing the forms too, I'll send out a video of me doing something like this, so you can see it again in iteration beyond this presentation. One last point to it, though, is I have to explain one concept here, which I hinted at this a little while ago, and I pulled up one of these images earlier. Has anyone not heard of the game Mad Libs? Okay, Mad Libs is like a game you buy for like kids. It's like a booklet where the first page are just these prompts. Somebody name a noun. Just throw out a random noun.
Car.
What's it?
Car.
Car. And someone name a person in this room.
Jason.
Besides me. What's that?
Magic.
What's that?
Magic.
Name a person in this room.
Leah.
Oh, Magic Johnson is in this room. Okay, cool. Let's go with it. Tonight's improv. Yes, and someone name a verb.
Run.
Run. And I'm looking at a Mad Libs thing where I'm now going to put those words into it. It was Thanksgiving, and the scent of succulent roast car wafted through the house. And Magic Johnson, it's time to run, my mother called. This is fun on road trips, right? That's Mad Libs, because I'll give you a preview of what you'll see on the handout of what we're about to do. The process begins like Mad Libs. Again, coming up with clever names. This is a process where I do a regression to a positive experience with anchoring. So you can see that I've very cleverly titled this method, Regression to a Positive Experience with Anchoring. I haven't come up with something more clever. And before the session, here's the Mad Libs. What is something you would like to do better? And let's use everybody the example of speaking more confidently on stage. And how would you like to feel as you're doing that? Chances are it's probably confident. Let's just go with that for the group demo. Before we get into this, allow yourself to create in your own mind whatever you'd consider to be your own organic anchor. Something that's appropriate for that environment of public speaking that you would actually do. This is not a joke about EFT. But the person, if I said the anchor was tap yourself on the forehead 18 times, and they're terrified of public speaking, now they're in front of the crowd, they go, hang on a second. No, wait. They're not going to do it. So this is the value of that organic concept in terms of building something natural to their experience. And again, so many of my public speakers is just simply that postural shift. When I work with athletes, it's the posture of how they get into motion for whatever their sport is. So, beautiful. So let's do this. I can say this to a hypnosis group without it being weird. Everybody assume the hypnotic position. And just briefly, let your eyes close. For this process, it probably is helpful if your hands are in your lap so they aren't touching, just somewhere comfortable. And we'll begin, we'll call it an Elman-esque approach to a hypnotic induction. As you all know how to do this, just gently let your eyelids close. Let your eyelids close and just realize that ability that you already have to relax those eyelids all the way to the place where you know you can make those things just not work. As if they could power off like a TV, as if they could shut down like a computer. So that even if you were to try to open them, instead they would just relax even further down. Kind of like checking a door that's locked to make sure it's still locked. And as you know that you have made them that good and relaxed, just go ahead and test them and satisfy yourself. You can make them just not work. Give them a try, you can just make them relax even further down. Give them a try, they just relax even further down. Quit testing and take that quality of comfort you've now established, let that just roll its way all the way down your body like a hypnotic wave of focus. Letting every breath you exhale help to guide you to a place of calm, awareness, and ability. And now, bring your attention to that feeling of confidence that you wish to experience more of. That feeling of confidence that you wish to experience more of. And as you know you want to experience that sensation, that feeling is already there in the vocabulary of your mind and body. In fact, in a moment, notice this. I'm going to count from the number 1 onward. And as I count from 1 onward, let that feeling of positive confidence start to come up within you more and more as 1. That confident feeling rising up throughout you more and more. 2, coming up even stronger now. 3, even more stronger than before. 4, coming up as strong and as powerful as it's ever been, as you can feel that confident sensation rising throughout you to a peak as 5. There it is. That feeling of confidence is a bridge to your past. That feeling of confidence is connected to all the wavelengths of your mind, of every experience where you felt that confident sensation. And whether that experience has anything to do with why we're together here today or not doesn't matter. All that matters is that confident sensation is there in your body, because I'm going to count backwards from 5 to 1. And as we do that, follow that feeling to a time where you felt that true sense of confidence is 5, following that feeling back to a specific experience now. 4, perhaps becoming younger, smaller. 3, as if you can go inside of that experience and see it through your own eyes, feel it in your own body, hear the sounds around you. The number 1, simply be there in that positive, confident experience now. In the privacy of your own thoughts, through the comfort of your closed eyes, be there in that experience and simply notice now whether it's daytime or nighttime. Simply notice now whether it's inside or outside. Become aware in that moment whether you're with people, whether you're by yourself. There's no right, there's no wrong. Whatever first pops into the mind is perfectly appropriate. Go into that confident sensation now and let that feeling start to rise up throughout you more and more with every breath you take in, with every breath you let go of, letting that feeling start to build and bubble up more and more throughout you. Like waves of energy starting to move throughout your body, letting the sensation even so spread far beyond the physical confines of your body, like rays of energy, like rays of sunlight, building you up more and more. Allow your body and mind to remember this confident sensation. In fact, whatever that anchor you've decided for yourself is, go ahead now, establish that anchor, that gesture, that shift, whatever it is. And notice now, as you let that feeling rise, as you establish that anchor, turn up that feeling even greater, even stronger. Turn that feeling up throughout you more and more, and whatever this means to you, allow yourself to pulse that anchor. Allow yourself to just build like a rhythm, like a valve, a pulse, turning up that feeling even greater, even stronger. In fact, as you activate that gesture, as you activate that shift within you, notice now, you can ride that feeling into an experience where there you are now, be there in your own thoughts, standing in front of a group of people and noticing these changing sensations already flowing throughout your body, helping yourself to remember this feeling of confidence, this feeling of authority. Activate, pulsate that anchor once again, turning up that feeling even greater, even stronger. This is nothing new. This is who you are. Turn that up even more. And be there, letting all of your senses now come alive in that experience. Hear the sounds of your own voice. Notice that audience receptive in front of you. Feel that sensation of your own voice resonating in the chambers of your own body. As every aspect of this experience now is feeding and just cultivating and just strengthening that confident sensation more and more. And even so, not just let this be a brief workshop experience. Give yourself permission right here, right now, to let this moment become transformative as you deserve it to be. So as you walk out that door, as you find yourself back in these environments, speaking to people on your own, you begin to find yourself feeling physically stronger and fitter, more alert, more wide awake, and more energetic. The mind becoming calmer, clearer, more composed, peaceful and at ease, discovering a greater sense of authority within yourself, feeling that changing awareness flowing throughout you now, even greater, even stronger. Pulsate that anchor one more time. And in fact, even now, whatever that gesture, whatever that shift was, relax it down. And just simply by thought, turn up that feeling on your own. Realize that ability you already have simply by choice, simply by decision. You can activate the sensation anytime, anywhere, without anyone realizing you're doing something. This is nothing new. This is who you are. Breathe into that reality. That's right. And in a moment, I'll simply count from 1 to 3. And only as you're ready to step into that reality at the count of 3, that's when those eyelids will reopen, stepping into that strength, stepping into that authority as one energy rising. Noticing how, without even having to suggest it, parts of your mind are already taking you out to other future experiences. And noticing how, like dominoes falling down, like ripples of water in the ocean, begin to clean up other experiences that even you haven't yet thought to address. The number 2, one last time, activate that anchor and realize that ability you have to turn up that feeling at will. And whatever that gesture, whatever that anchor was, relax it down and turn up that feeling even greater, even stronger. Hold on to that. This is nothing new. This is who you are. And only as you're ready now, let those eyelids open, feeling refreshed, feeling alert, feeling good. And before we wrap it up, one more time, establish that anchor. Establish that gesture, that move, whatever it is. Notice you can turn that feeling up even in this waking conscious state. And even so, really do this for yourself. Whatever that gesture was, relax it down and turn up this feeling by choice. Cool, right? Awesome. So let me pass this out, which I have way too many of these, so feel free to grab a couple of them. One for the office, one for the car. This presentation is hypnotic in nature. Do not listen to it while operating a forklift. So really, without having to play the game of scriptural analysis, we don't really have to go line by line and unpack everything that's here. But really, again, it becomes the Mad Libs game. And this is where, yeah, there's some more coming around. Thank you for passing those out, too. This is where, again, the Mad Libs mindset, I'm learning from the client what their specific needs are. And again, describing the technique, it's doing the same technique. So by talking through with the client what that anchor is going to be, we are already establishing, hey, that's going to work for me. There's a few little nuances inside of this, too. Has anyone ever had the experience with a client where they drop that statement that, oh, I've never felt confident, I've never felt happy, I've never felt fill in the blank? Have you heard that before? Yeah. Annoys the hell out of you, doesn't it? Yes. Yeah, I know. And let's be ethically and healingly cynical for a moment. Which part of the mind is making that judgment, conscious or unconscious? Conscious. And it's where sometimes if we can build a frame, Richard Nongard does a great lecture on relationship frame. The example of, I'm going to list 2 random objects in the room, table and water bottle, which one's the parent of the other? And as soon as you answer the question, you've now created a bit of logic in your mind, and the odd thing is, even though you just made up the answer, you will now argue it and you will defend it, which is silly because you just made it up. So it's where sometimes if you put something into a context, which is a plug for the HPTI Winter Hypnosis Conference, the keynote that I'm doing there is simply on hypnotic framing. What are these little phrases that, again, the power of prestige suggestion? Here's one from Scott Sandlin that he uses if it's some sort of like spinning technique. You wouldn't be able to notice that feeling in your body if it didn't have movement. So bring your attention back to that feeling and tell me what direction is it moving, which is a massive lead. But if you just ask, what's the movement of it? If you ask the binary, is there movement? They might just say no. But by driving the mind into a context, it has to have movement, otherwise you wouldn't feel it. So what direction is it moving? The moment they answer, they are either, sounds familiar, discovering or creating it. At which point now we've got something tangible we can play with. Though I think the champion of the framing statements is Lance Baker in Australia, and I'll censor it. He'll wait for a moment to go, do I have your permission for things to get a little effing weird in here as long as it gets the result? Yeah. Good, close your eyes. How great is that for kicking in? Thank you. So there's a framing statement inside of this, which whether he is your choice of politics or comedy or not, Bill Maher on HBO hosts a program called Real Time with Bill Maher. And there's a common routine that he does on that show, which I wrote it down because I keep getting it wrong. I don't know it for a fact, I just know it's true. And to his credit, as a guy who is like mostly liberal leaning, he will attack both sides when he does this whole thing. I don't know if this is a fact, I just know it's true, and then some sort of hard-hitting political statement. So As you know you want to experience that sensation, pace, that feeling is already in the vocabulary of your mind and body. Lead. I don't know if this is a fact, but it sure sounds like it's true. So because I've said, basically, you wouldn't know you wanted it if you didn't know what it was already like. And you wouldn't know what it was like if you haven't yet already experienced it. Make sense? I know, right? Yeah. So by building that little bit of a case, I will tell you now, since coming up with that little bit of wordplay, it's been like 8 years since the person has had the ability to say, but I've never felt this way before. And if they did, I immediately go, well, think about it this way, though, right? Because you know you want to feel that, you know what it's like, which means you had to have experienced before because, you know, if we brought a smartphone back to someone in caveman times, at first they wouldn't be impressed because they wouldn't know what it was. You know, same as you wouldn't know you wanted to feel that way if you didn't know what it was like, and you wouldn't know what it was like if you haven't yet already experienced it, right? You wouldn't know you want to have tiramisu with dinner tonight if you haven't had tiramisu before. Make sense? Okay, good. So that confident feeling is somewhere inside. We're just going to resurface it. Make sense? And yes, that is ethical influence and persuasion, but that's what they hired me for. There's a question in the back on that, yeah?
No, it's with the connecting point. The other thing that you said during the portion where you were emphasizing was, this isn't new, this is who you are.
Yeah, the comment about the phrase, this isn't new, this is who you were. Sorry?
That's super powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it takes away any thought that you need to go back to what you are.
There's a metaphor. Let me give a disclaimer to this story. The more successful the hypnotist I meet, the more they are willing to play during the session time. They are willing to throw out an experiment and find what happens if I do this. So here's one of my examples. Here's this extended metaphor, which branches off of that term. That story of the statue of David chipping away the layers that don't need to be there, discovering the statue was already there inside. I had a solid month where the rule was, no matter what you came in the office for, first session, I had to tell you that story. And I had to make it work. Which, what's the metaphor of the story? Again, Wizard of Oz and everything else. The resource was already there inside. So the more that I can chip away, sand away, and polish away the layers that don't have to be there anymore is what we're doing. We're finding that resource state inside and bringing it up. So just reiterating that strength that they've already got, which back to the dynamic of presentations, let me phrase this in the way that I have to phrase it. If you're going to start a band, don't call it Hootie and the Blowfish because that name is already taken. Should I unpack the metaphor and just let it just sit like that? Okay. You can't be the speaker like this other person. You can be the speaker to the best of your abilities, what's appropriate for the context that you're in. So rather than being something new, it's about who you are. But this perfectly leads into the next point of this, which is that I'm going to give my public speaking clients homework, which is that I want them now to surround themselves with effective speakers. I want them to surround themselves with good information, which can be as simple as saying TED Talks. You know, start to listen to those. Start to listen to people who have done audiobooks that are also dynamic speakers, and start to hear their delivery. Start to hear some of that. Surround yourself with people, and I'll tell a personal story on this one, which is that I am not trying to emulate or copy someone else's stuff. But there's a moment that if I'm doing like a webinar, an online presentation, let's call out the structure of a webinar. I'm going to teach something for a long time, and then there's going to be a natural pivot at the end of it to go, here's how you can get more, and there's the sales offer towards the end once the value has been established. And I'm channeling Steve Jobs in that moment because he's so excited about the product, he's so excited about the new features, it's faster, but one more thing. And Apple did not invent wireless internet, they got to premiere it. He lifts up the laptop, there's no cables, it's wireless internet. He's talking about the new features of the phone, but one more thing, he hits the button and the Jetsons have arrived, we've got a video phone in our hands. So that moment of the one final pivot, I go, I'm not trying to be Steve Jobs when I'm presenting, but I'm drawing a clear line of once I have established the full value, that's where I then go, and here's what else. So here's the great value, but there's just one more thing that can help even more. This is why you want that. So look at that example. I'm not trying to sell his products. I'm not trying to be him, but I can model something that came out of that as a simple example. So to look at other presenters, other speakers, and start to kind of become that chameleon, drawing in some of those other resources too. So that's some of that conscious homework. There is one simple nuance which, again, depending on their situation, we're going to engage in a dialogue, and I'm going to go into my hypnotic data bank, which of all the different techniques that we know, and sometimes play the game of what techniques can they often use. The one that I'd share with you is a simple one. That why is it that most speakers gesture awkwardly? Why is it most speakers pace uncomfortably? Because they don't know what they should be doing. Again, going for the specific rare cultural references, has anybody seen The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, Talladega Nights, the Will Ferrell race car movie? The opening scene, this race car driver is being interviewed. It's Will Ferrell, so comedy. And the opening bit is he's now on camera for the first time being interviewed, and what's the gag? Where do I put my hands? He doesn't know how to stand in front of a camera and appear natural. Oh, just put them down by your sides. Okay. And hilarity ensues. So, and many people have seen that movie. I can give the reference. They get the humor of it. But I go, here's the strategy. We've talked about anchoring. And as part of your presentation, step one, you want to rehearse the stuff that you're going to be doing. You know, if you're getting up there and doing it for the first time, no wonder you're terrified, and that's the one negative suggestion I'm going to give you. So give it some thought, give it some outlines, the way that I've got a bit of a cheat sheet over here for my points of what I'm covering. But at the same time, recognize in your presentation, here are the positives, here are perhaps the negatives or the challenges of that industry. And here's the disclaimer that I'll give you on this one. In theory, giant air quotes, if I'm talking about the strengths of some service or product and the benefits that they're looking for in their business from here, and then in theory, if I move over here to talk about the challenges they've been facing, again, in theory, if I now talk about my services and the offer I can make and why we can work together as a team on this project, and I deliver that from here, I have hypnotically, electrically charged this region of the room as if now that's the positive state. But then again, of course, there are other services that are out there you might have been looking at. And I'm now talking about the competition and the negative thing. Let's pull back for a moment and let's be a little appropriately cynical on this. And this is really what I say to people on this. Because I've delivered the sales message from here, is that going to produce the sale? The best you can say is maybe. Because I've talked about the competition from over here, is that going to influence them to not buy with those people? Again, the best you can say is maybe. But at the same time, am I now moving with intention and with purpose to stand over here and deliver my message congruently, effectively, and confidently? And also, I know when it's time to talk about the other things, now I have a reason rather than where do I put my hands. So the riddle at the end of this technique that I want you to play with as you work on your presentation is, are you hypnotizing the audience or are you hypnotizing yourself to be more confident? Either way, you can see how this is going to help you, right? So by taking that technique, and that's one such example of how we can put that all into the context, the biggest thing is at the end of it, you want to ratify the hypnotic experience as soon as you emerge. From various hypnotic trainings, you'll see the question of how long is the client in a suggestible state after emergence. One book will say 20 seconds. One book will say a minute. I'm going to simplify the answer. As long as you are delivering hypnotic suggestion, you still have a hypnotized client. So eyes open, and check this out. I want you to see how well this is working for you. I don't never if my clients. I want to see how well this is working for you. Go ahead, do that thing again, and as you do that, notice what's different. Which the power of vague language. Notice what's different. Become aware of that changing sensation. They nod their head, and you go, yeah, what does that feel like? And now we have their map of the world. So in the shape of this, looking at how we can establish their specific anchor, and before the eyes even close, they're going into that experience going, I know this is going to work, which metaphorically is the same experience of before they walk on the stage, they know they're going to do great. That's how you empower public speakers. Which, by the way, you can also cheat because I also just gave you an applause cue, and it worked until I pointed it out. Or if you prefer the Game of Thrones version, you can White King your audience to get the standing ovation. Thank you.